student chapter. Before going to the section, I would like to give a brief introduction about the speaker, Dr. Harikrishna M. He completed his graduation in civil engineering from College of Engineering, Trivandrum. He did his post-graduation in engineering, Gindi. He completed his PhD in transportation planning from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. Currently, he is working as an assistant professor in the Department of Civil Engineering in National Institute of Technology, Calicut. Welcome you, sir. And once again, I welcome each one of you to this webinar section and wishing you all a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Justin. I hope I'm audible to you all. Let me first thank Jyothi Engineering College for giving me an opportunity to present few aspects relating to transportation planning. Shall I share my screen right now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
Yeah. So the topic for today's webinar is an insight into transportation planning. Transportation planning is a rather very big course. It runs into 2 semesters for a typical PG program. So I would not venture much into the details, but give you an overview into transportation planning. Let me first start off with a quote by Rudyard Kipling. I keep 6 honest men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and where and when and how and why and who. Some of these aspects are what I would be discussing in this particular webinar. I would also start off with a disclaimer that the material that I'm presenting here is drawn heavily from the references which is listed at the end of the presentation. And you might refer to this for further details. Now, the layout of my presentation is as follows. I'll be talking about why we require transportation planning in terms of urbanization and challenges posed by urbanization. What is transportation planning definition and how a transportation system is defined, and what are the various aspects relating to transportation planning. I would also venture into how to do transportation planning in terms of attaining an equilibrium between transport demand and transport supply, and perhaps into urban travel demand forecasting, which is typically done as a core transportation planning process, and end this with certain smart city initiatives and the way forward as well as transportation planning is concerned. Now, why transportation planning? What is the requirement for us to do transportation planning? Now, if you see the statistics regarding the urban population, how many people actually live in urban areas today? So if you take this plot of the number of people who live in urban areas and rural areas in the world from 1960 to 2017, you would see that there has been a steep rise in the number of people who live in urban areas, while the people who are living in rural areas have sort of gained an equilibrium. Essentially means we have over half of the world, 55% of the people live in urban settings. And the year in which the number of urban people overtook the number of people in the rural areas occurred sometime in 2007. So essentially, which means we have around 4 billion people who live in urban areas in the year 2017. And there is a mass migration of population from rural to urban areas. We have seen a concept of this few months back when we saw a reverse migration from urban to rural areas. Now, if you compare the urban-rural population in developed countries and developing countries, the statistics that are shown here are with respect to 2 countries, one in India, which is a developing country, and a developed country, which is the United States. You would see that both the developing and developed countries have shown a steep increase in the urban population. In the case of developing country like India, there has been an increase in the rural population also, while the rural population is sort of stagnant over the years in the case of the United States of America. Essentially, this slide implies that you have an increase in the urban population, and the problem is not associated only with a developing country like India, it is also with a developed country like the United States. Now, what about the population density? Now, this is a statistics of 2014, which shows that Dhaka has the highest population density of about 44,000 people per square kilometer. We are not far behind. We have Chennai, Delhi, and Mumbai, each having more than 9,000 people per square kilometer. And of course, we have other countries where the population density is pretty low, essentially, which means that developing countries have an issue of large population densities. Now, perhaps this would also be attributed to the rapid spread of the COVID pandemic these days, when you see that all the three cities having high population density have also increased, have larger caseloads. Now, if you see the share of the people who live in urban areas, if you see this particular video clip, you would see that over the years, the number of people who live in areas have been increasing over the years. You see that as the year progresses, it's getting darker and darker, which means more number of people are living in urban areas. And if it is expected that by 2050, more than 2/3 of the world will live in urban areas, which means 68% of the world's population would live in urban areas, an increase from around 54% in 2016. And it is expected that by the year 2050, there will be very few countries where the rural share of the population is expected to be higher than the urban share. Something in some countries like Sub-Saharan Africa or the Pacific Island states and Guyana and Latin America. These are the few places where the rural population is expected to be more than the urban population. Now, in the future, if you see that by 2050, it is expected that close to 7 billion people would live in urban areas, which means the global population is expected to rise to 9.8 billion people, and more than twice as many people in the world will be living in urban areas than in rural settings, which means you have larger population concentrated in the urban areas. Now, associated with this increase in urban population is the challenges that are raised by the urban transportation. It is quite natural for us to expect that most of the urban transport systems cannot satisfy the requirements relating to urban mobility. In other words, urban transport systems are not able to cater to the large demand that is posed by the number of people. This leads to problems essentially associated with congestion on the roads, personalized mode dependency, an increased demand for road infrastructure, which means more roads, or it could be more parking spaces. See, for example, this is a plot of the parking rates in the central business districts across cities in the world. You see that London has a very, very high parking fee that is being charged. And of course, an increase in parking fee is one of the traffic system improvement measures which has been taken up by most countries around the world to cater to reduce the demand so that the supply can, take care of the demand. We have longer commuting times. We have more time that is taken by the residents of a particular city to move from their place of where they live to the place where they work. And assuming the fact that the areas surrounding an urban area would be more affordable to the people to set up their residences, you have people who commute every day. So there is an exchange of the commuting time for the housing affordability. So more people are likely to commute for longer distances, which means there is again a demand for the transportation system, especially when they have to move for work from the place where they live to the place where they work. You have very inadequate public transportation systems. They are either overused or underused, depending upon the time of the day. You have periods of peaks and troughs in the demand. And during the peak hours, you have more number of people causing discomfort, and you have a temporary surge in the demand. So which means during non-peak hours, the demand remains less. During peak hours, the demand remains more. We have, again, difficulties with the non-motorized transport, especially the vulnerable road users like pedestrians, bicyclists, and so on. So any development which is aimed at these vulnerable road users, would always come at a cost to the motorized transport, because you need to set apart a certain space for these vulnerable road users within the existing carriageway, which comes at the cost of a motorized transport. So what do we do? Okay, that's always a big question. Now you have a lot of public space, because increased traffic has more impact on public activities, and traffic flow would always influence life and interactions of people in a particular area. You have problems associated with crashes, you have safety issues on the roads, you have congestion, where every vehicle will impair the mobility of other vehicles in the stream. So an unavoidable consequence of the use of scarce transport resources, especially if they are not priced. In other words, you have lots of vehicles trying to use a particular road facility. These are always aspects which you are quite familiar with. So this problems associated with urbanization necessitate some amount of planning to be done for our transportation systems. Now, this planning, whatever that can be done, could either be a long-term strategic planning, which is quite complex, which is based upon long-term predictions relating to the particular system, involves multiple levels of the government, the administration, the public. See, for a typical example is the initiatives of the National Highway Authority of India to have the Golden Quadrilateral project, which is a long-term strategic planning, which involves steps to improve the road infrastructure. It is based upon the long-term predictions over 10 years normally, and it's pretty complex, and you have both various levels of government, the central government, the state government, the various planning agencies, and of course the local self-government, essentially because this involves land acquisition. We could have short to medium-term planning also, which is usually less complex, which sometimes could be to the improvement of a particular junction, or it could be proposing a new bypass the road for your urban area. So the uncertainty associated with the short-term planning is relatively less. It becomes very specific. And of course, public involvement is a major aspect in both levels of planning, in both the long-term strategic planning and the short-term, medium-term planning. So planning aspects both in the long-term, to the short-term and the medium-term involves people. Now, what is transportation planning? Now, if I take transportation planning and the definition of the transportation planning that is given by the Institution of Engineers, the Institution of Transportation Engineers have defined transportation planning as a collaborative and participative process which involves agencies, organizations, and the public in a comprehensive look at the national, state, regional, and community needs relating to the demographic characteristics and travel patterns of a given area. In other words, transportation planning is expected to look at how population changes over time. What are the change in characteristics of the population? How do you expect the travel patterns to be under consideration? So we normally try to do transportation planning, especially with respect to an urban setting, where there is a defined boundary to the particular urban area, and people would travel from one part of the city to the other for various purposes. We'll come to that a bit in detail. It shows how these characteristics would change with respect to time. That means, how does demography change? How does travel patterns change? Be done in the transportation system so that these changes in the demographic characteristics and travel patterns can be accommodated for. So how do you change the system? So what new systems can be added, or how can an existing system be improved so that a change in the demography, a change in population, the change in the travel pattern can be suitably accommodated? So essentially, the transportation planning provides information that is required to choose among various alternative strategies which are aimed at improving the system performance. So essentially, if you take an urban area, you would want the people to travel from one part of the city to the other in a very safe way. You need them to travel in such a way that the travel time is less. You need to ensure that there is... Transportation planning essentially comes out with plans, which helps us to choose between strategies which are aimed at improving the system performance. So essentially, transportation system is future-oriented. It always, as I told you in the previous slide, that it involves both short-term and long-term planning. Of course, there are uncertainties in predictions that is always inherent in any planning process. And any planning process is also expected to balance between the short-term and the long-term benefits associated with planning. Short-term benefits could be perhaps a reduction in the travel time, but the long-term benefit or cost could be associated with an impact on the environment, impact on the wildlife, etc. See, for example, when you propose a new road to be planned between connecting Kerala and Bangalore against the alternate route now, in the long-term benefit could be the environmental impact assessment that needs to be done. The short term perhaps could be how much of travel time can be reduced and how it is possible for it to quantify the savings in travel time. Okay, so that's what we essentially do in transport planning. Now, so essentially we have seen that any transportation planning is expected to improve a transportation system. I would like to have a definition about the transportation system. It's a pretty big definition, but I'm sure it will be quite easy for you to understand that any transportation system can be defined as an optimum combination of fixed facilities. Now, fixed facilities could be railway stations, it could be the tracks, it could be bus depots, as you see here, it could be harbors, ports, it could be airport terminals, it could be pipelines. In other words, fixed facilities cover all range of modes with respect to water, with respect to air, with respect to rail, with respect to road, and also with respect to freight movements. So a transportation system, therefore, is an optimum combination of these fixed facilities, flow entities, which could be pedestrians, it could be vehicles on the road, it could be railway trains, planes, and of course ships, covering all modes. Operational plans. What is the timetable at which these things move? It could be a railway timetable as it's seen here, it could be a bus timetable, it could be a ship timetable. Storage facilities, essentially associated with freight, wherein you talk about railway yards, where you talk about aircraft hangars, or you talk about berths for ships. So an optimal combination of fixed facilities, flow entities, operational plants, and control systems. The control systems like a signal, it could be a roundabout, it could be signaling systems in railways, it could be an automatic landing systems in case of flight, which are designed to improve the accessibility by overcoming the friction offered by the geographical space in a safe, efficient, and convenient manner. So essentially, all these systems that are put in place are designed to improve accessibility. Accessibility means ease to access a particular facility. How does it do that? It does this by overcoming the friction offered by the geographical space. Now, essentially, we have activities that are spatially separated. The place where you stay is not the same as the place where you work. The place where you stay is not the place where you study. So you have a space which differentiates, which lies between these places where these activities are undertaken, and therefore you require a system so that this friction that is offered by the geographical space can be overcome very easily in a safe manner, in a crash-free manner, in an efficient manner with less travel time or maybe less travel cost, and also in a very convenient manner, which provides space and time utility to the required activity. Now, this is something that you need to understand, that when I say space utility, now I'm reminded of an instance which was quoted in the book Freedom at Midnight by Dominic Lapierre and Larry Collins, who talks about the partition of the Indian subcontinent. So the authors of that particular book say that when India was partitioned into the East Bengal and India, all the jute making or the jute producing areas became concentrated in the East Bengal, while all the jute processing factories became concentrated in the West Bengal. You have a national boundary there between the two countries, per se, in 1947. You don't have a transportation system. So this, in other words, the transportation system provides a space utility to the required activity. In other words, it helps you to move goods from one particular part of the country to the other, so that people can derive utility, usefulness out of the desired activity. Similarly, transportation systems also provide a time utility. So it is not only enough that you get goods, say for example, perishable goods like milk. It is not only enough that you get milk, but you want to get milk which is usable. So the time becomes an element there. You want to get vegetables which are fresh. So you need to have systems put in place, which refrigeration in this particular case, which helps you to transport milk from the place where it is processed to the place to the consumer's hand. So you need to have systems in place so that the time utility is given to the desired activity, or the objects or the commodities can be used by the people in sufficient time, while maintaining the environment and for looking for sustainable alternatives requiring less resource consumption. So these two aspects, of course, inherent in any systems, because maintaining the environment and reducing the load on air pollution, on air, on water, on land, etc., becomes extremely critical. And you also need to look at alternatives which are sustainable, resource alternatives which are sustainable, such as the shift perhaps to electric vehicles or shift to CNG and so on, okay, which requires less cost. So a transportation system is expected to provide you this. Therefore, in short, the transportation system comprises of an infrastructure that is being put in place. You have a management system, okay, which manages the movement of flow in a particular network, and you have a set of modes and their operators who run these particular modes. Now, how to design this transportation system is what we do in transportation planning. Now, some of the aspects that we look up in transportation planning is the urban travel demand modeling. We have always seen that urban population is increasing. Therefore, there is a need to understand the travel demand with specific reference to urban areas. And it's also required for us to project this travel demand to the future, okay, so that the increase in population can be accounted for, can be considered in the design. We have public transport planning and design, which also forms a part of transportation planning. You have freight demand modeling, because you have movement of goods from one part of the country to other. It could be through land, it could be through rail, it could be through water, it could be through air. Now, a separate part of transportation planning is in freight demand both for perishable goods and for non-perishable goods. Okay, and of course we have systems wherein there are a combination of modes. It becomes quite complex in that way. You have the roll-on, roll-off systems, wherein which trucks can get into the chases of railway carriages, and they can be transported over rail. And once it reaches the destination, they can just roll off to the required destination, providing a door-to-door connectivity. So you have such systems in place which needs to be designed. You need to look at the environmental impact assessment of projects, especially. You need to have a modeling or understanding and interaction between land use and transportation. Land use have profound influence on transportation systems. You would know that a change in land use would essentially, cause a changes in transportation systems also, and vice versa. So it is said that in our country, wherein which we allow the land use changes to take place, and then we introduce a transportation system. In most of the Western countries, it is the reverse. When you build a road and the transportation systems come later. So you have transportation system analysis and design, essentially, which talks about how to analyze a system in place and how to design a system. We have transport economics, because any major transportation project always involves money. Therefore, it's essential that we need to quantify the benefits, the cost, and see what are the returns that you would get out of a transportation project. We also have planning for parking areas, since parking is an essential part of transportation. Therefore, it is found that almost 95% of the time that a vehicle is on the road, it is stationary. In other words, it just doesn't move, which means you require spaces for it to be parked. So parking planning, and of course, many more such as. So this is a broad gamut of topics which come transportation planning. It's up to, depending upon the particular project in hand, this would be looked at in its own perspective. Now, I would move forward to how to do this transportation planning. Depending upon the time that is available to me, perhaps I would go in detail into the transportation planning process, the urban transportation planning process. Otherwise, I would give you a broad overview of what this is like. Now, if you take transportation planning always tries to maintain an equilibrium between the supply and the demand part. Now, the supply is nothing but the road. Say, for example, if you grow transportation, the supply would be the roads. Okay, it could be perhaps the vehicles. The demand would be the number of people who would be using it. So the role of transportation planning is to ensure satisfaction for a certain demand, if I put it as D, which could be for persons, which could be for goods, for the movement of persons and goods who are having different trip purposes. Now, this is one definition that that a trip is nothing but a one-way movement between an origin and a destination. So people move for different purposes. It could be for work, it could be for education, it could be for recreation, it could be social trips like visiting a friend's relatives, it could be religious trips, it could be medical trips. So people move, for different trip purposes at different times of the day and of the year. Okay. Now, the goods movement also occur at different times of the day and different times of the year using various modes. So, if there is a demand for the movement of goods, for the movement of people to satisfy certain trip purposes at different times of the day, how do you ensure that there is satisfaction for this particular demand, given you have a transportation system which is with a certain operating capacity? In other words, how many number of people, how many number of kilos of goods or tons of goods can be accommodated by the particular system. So if you take the set of traffic volumes on the network as V and the corresponding speeds as S, if the capacity of the particular system is Q, you have a management system M, okay, and you have a level of investment that is I, with an allocation of activities over space. You can say that the speed of vehicles on a particular network is a function of the operating capacity. Okay. Greater the capacity, greater could be the speeds. The speeds is again a function of the set. More the number of traffic volumes in the network, lesser could be the speeds. Again, it depends upon the capacity. So again, you have interaction between these terms as well. You have again the speeds, which are a function of the management system. So depending upon the level of management that is put in place, whether you have a dynamic traffic allocation system, you have a static traffic allocation system, whether you have controls at intersections or not. So all this could define the speeds, because essentially any control is bound to cause some delay to one or the other vehicle movement. You also have operation capacity Q, which could be a function of the level of investment. So the more the level of investment, greater could be the capacity. In other words, you spend more to perhaps, you introduce a particular new metro rail, or you spend money to acquire more land and increase the width. Obviously, the capacity of the particular system would also tend to increase. By the way, capacity is a maximum flow rate that can associate with the particular system. And of course, the management system. So more efficient a particular management system is, the more can be the capacity. So there is always a pull between the supply and the demand. So the demand is a function of the speeds. More the speeds, more will be the demand. And also the allocation of activities, or clustered allocation of activities over space, then the demand in the transportation system could be less, corresponding to, on the other hand, we have a larger allocation of activities dispersed over space, requires more demand on the transportation system. So essentially, this perhaps shows the conundrum of the supply demand, which you will see. This has been sourced from Otto and Williamson from his book, Modeling Transport. So you see that in case when the people's income starts rising, you would have increased car ownership. Once people start using more cars on the roads, there would be more congestion and delay, which would cause reduced demand for the buses, which means increased car ownership would cause reduced demand. More congestion and delay would cause reduced demand. Okay, and more congestion and delay would cause less mileage for bus, which means bus increases the bus operating cost. And to compensate for increase bus operating cost, you need to raise the fares. And once the fares are raised for a public transportation system, your cars becomes even more attractive, and therefore it again causes an increase in car ownership and a reduction frequency. And once you have buses and reduced frequency, you have again the car becomes more attractive, which again causes an car ownership increase. So this is essentially the conundrum which happens when you have an increase in demand. Of course, you cannot say that people cannot have their income raised. Everybody wants to have more cars. Now, what does transportation planning do? The transportation planning tries to have certain interventions being done in this particular movement, in this particular cycle. See, for example, when you have more congestion and delay on the roads, one way which you can introduce, one improvement measure, is to have a bus priority lane, which means buses would have more priority on the particular roads compared to that of a personalized vehicle, which means when at a signal, perhaps, when a bus comes, the bus would be given a green, while the personalized vehicle would be given a red. In case if you can provide subsidies, okay, when the demand for buses start reducing, so subsidies could be in the form of reduced fares, say for example, then perhaps you could make more people move on to the buses. Or you have car restraints, say for example, you restrict the number of cars per household, or you make parking charges pretty high, then perhaps it could be a disincentive for people to own more cars. Now, how do you come out with these intervention strategies is what transportation planning would help you to do. Okay, what sort of an improvement measure can you introduce, okay, to solve these problems associated with lesser demand for public transportation when you have large car ownership issues? Now, usually I told you that transportation planning is taken up with respect to urban areas where we talk about urban travel demands. So we try to take a particular urban area into consideration with a well-defined boundary, and we try to analyze what will be the demand in the future. So the future demand could be with respect to 5 years, with respect to 10 years, depending upon the level at which you're going to do the planning. So what is the travel demand for the future? That is what is required for you. Now, why do you want to do travel demand forecasting? We need to do travel demand forecasting because we want to find what are the impacts of the facilities or the various modes of travel on the existing transportation systems, on the existing roads, on the existing light rail systems or the bus service systems that are already in place, and what could be its impact on the delay on the existing roads. Travel demand forecasting would give you inputs into geometric design of roads. Say, for example, you want to widen the road from a divided 4-lane to a divided 6-lane road. Okay? The justification would be based upon the output from a travel demand forecasting. It helps you in pavement design, especially when you talk about highways, which are subjected to vehicles of very heavy loads. In pavement design, you need to get the output from a travel demand forecasting. It will also help you to plan for infrastructure development in a particular urban area. Now, whenever we talk about urban area, essentially, though freight demand forms a part of it, we'll restrict today's discussion only to traveler decisions because it's people who move quite a lot. Therefore, the decisions regarding the traveler becomes extremely important. So what are the type of decisions that a traveler do? The first traveler decision could be at what time of the day do you go? When do you go? When do you start for shopping? When do you start for school? When do you start for work? Of course, these traveler decisions are more or less predictable because you know your school timing, you know what is your work timing. But for shopping, for example, by housewives or the homemakers, there could be a choice. Where exactly do you go? What is the destination? Where do you go for shopping? Do you go for shopping to the ordinary grocery store near your house? Or do you go for maybe travel 5 kilometers to a shopping mall or to Reliance or any other big shopping center? What mode do you use to travel? How do you get there? Do you use your two-wheeler or do you use your car? Or do you use a public transportation system? Do you walk? Or do you use your bicycle? What is it that you use? Which route do you take? You have multiple routes to go from an origin to a destination. For which particular route do you choose? Now, these are the decisions which a traveler does. Please remember that an aggregation of these traveler decisions are going to influence the demand on the system. Now, economic conditions would define these decisions. Social conditions would define these decisions. So when I say economic conditions, I would say that a person who has high income, who owns a car, would obviously tend to use his own car. And he is more likely to travel to a destination which is farthest away rather than another person who doesn't have his own vehicle, who might use walk and go to a destination which is closer to his house or his shopping center, whatever. Social conditions in that, with whom all do you go? How many number of people do you have in your household with whom you go? So please remember that the time, the destination, the mode, the route, the purpose, all this could be influenced by these social and economic factors. Now, how is it possible for you to predict these decisions for the future so that we can take into account of these demands on the system to be taken into account by the supply? So predicting traveler decisions becomes therefore extremely important for us. One way by the way we do this is that you start collecting data on the travel behavior. So we make observations on the number of buses, the number of cars and two-wheelers which run on the roads. We do surveys. We collect the data on what the travelers have done, and we collect the data on the values and choices. In other words, we do perhaps a household survey to see in the past a typical weekday, where have the people actually gone? Which is the mode that they used? How much did they spend from the pocket, and how much time did they take to move from their origin to a destination? So you collect the data regarding what are the activities on which the travelers have participated. We collect data on the values and choices, the utility that you associate with each of those choices. Of course, you would also have predictions which could be inexact in nature, could be attributed to incomplete data, especially for a person who is doing travel demand modeling or transportation planning would know that data becomes a major requirement. There could be reporting problems. The reason why I talk about reporting problems here is that, for example, income. Now, income is a very, very sticky issue for most survey. People go for questionnaire survey. People would not like to divulge their incomes. The reason being that because of various reasons, but this income becomes a major influencing factor with respect to the mode that they choose, with respect to the destination of the trip, and so on and so forth. But however, we try to circumvent these issues by clubbing at some other attributes which can be easily be collected. We'll come to that a bit later. So travel demand forecasting, therefore, can be divided into four major steps. The first one is trip generation. The second is trip distribution. The third is mode split. And the fourth is trip assignment. I told you that a trip is a one-way movement between origin and a destination. As I go to the next slide, I would perhaps tell you in brief about these four steps. I would not think I would have time to go into details of this, which is in fact one full course as far as transportation planning is concerned. Okay, now coming to trip generation. Now, trip generation essentially helps us to find how many number of trips will begin or end in each traffic analysis zone. So I told you that we would be taking an urban area. It is quite, since this urban area could be pretty big. So we try to divide it into a number of small manageable areas, traffic analysis zones, or TAZs. Now, these traffic analysis zones or the zones essentially would try to follow the land use patterns. It would try to follow the boundaries which has been fixed by the municipal authorities because it helps us for easy data collection. So trip generation would essentially tell you that how many trips will begin from a particular traffic analysis zone and how many trips would end in a traffic analysis zone after, say, a 5-year period or a 10-year, depending upon various characteristics of the people who reside there. And once you get the total number of trips which will begin or end in a traffic analysis zone, you would also need to find how many trips which begin at a particular origin will end up at a particular destination. This we call it as trip distribution. So this comes in the form of what is called as an origin destination matrix, which helps you to show that if 100 trips, if there are say 5 zones crudely, and 100 trips are generated in the morning, okay, for work from zone 1, this 100 trips could be distributed to 20, 50, and 30 to zones 2, 3, and 4, and perhaps nothing to zone 5, and vice versa. So you have trips so the trip distribution would essentially tell you how many trips which begin at a particular origin which will end at a particular destination. Mode split would essentially tell you how many travelers will choose a particular mode of transportation. So that essentially means what is the probability with which people would choose a particular mode. So say after 5 years, assuming that the income of the people would tend to increase and car ownership is also expected to increase, what could be the patronage in an existing transportation system? So the mode split would essentially tell you how many travelers will choose a particular mode that is available. And the trip assignment would tell you which is a route that would be taken by a trip maker. So obviously, common sense would always tell you that a trip maker would always choose a particular trip in which the travel time is less. Okay, the shortest path to reach the destination. So you have therefore the trip assignment, which helps you to identify which particular route will be taken by a trip maker, depending upon the volume of traffic in that particular trip and the travel time on that particular route. Okay. Now this is a travel demand modeling process. So you see that you have 4 major steps: trip generation, trip distribution, modal split, and trip assignment. So trip generation is how many number of trips. Trip distribution is where do these trips go, how is it distributed. Modal split is which particular mode will they take, and trip assignment is which particular route they would take. I would skip the details of these and would skip directly to smart city initiatives. This is something which is in fact an aspect in which transportation planning plays a major role. In fact, since cities of the future are going to be bigger and more crowded, we need to have smart transportation systems which help you to cater to this demand. Now, will this transportation systems be smart enough to cater to this demand? Will we have more patronage for public transit systems, or will we have autonomous and connected vehicles on the roads? These are questions which any of you should be able to answer. So the future of transportation system probably is somewhere in between these two. That means somewhere in between a complete reliance on your public transit systems, or a complete reliance on autonomous vehicle systems, but a blended autonomous vehicle systems which are used for personal modes and on-demand solo or ride-sharing transportation solutions, with public transport and microtransit and alternative mobility options like e-bikes and scooters. So when I say on-demand solo or ride-sharing transportation solutions, it means your on-demand services like Uber or Ola, which will help to complement the public transportation systems and use microtransit. Microtransit is also a form of on-demand systems. And also you have systems like e-bikes and scooters, which tend to reduce the impact on the environment. So in other words, there would be a shift which is expected for transportation as a product, which means from a car-oriented one to a mass system. We call it as mobility as a service system, where the users would pay for transportation on a per-use basis. So mass or the mobility as a service is one particular aspect wherein you use communication technologies to use both personalized modes as well as public transportation systems to move from one particular place to the other. We have Internet of Things, which is creating lots of opportunities for this automation of complex transportation systems. And the smart technologies are being used extensively these days to meet what are the demands for tomorrow. Of course, you have a smart city, which essentially uses a number of electronic data collection systems. Why I'm trying to introduce smart city to you is because transportation planning can do quite a lot in using smart city concepts to have more efficient operation of vehicles and systems. So you must be knowing quite a lot about smart cities, but one major core infrastructural element in a smart city is an efficient urban mobility and public transportation system. So this is something which transportation planning planners can contribute quite a lot to. So you see here, smart parking, intelligent traffic management, integrated multimodal transport, all this becomes a part of the smart solutions, which is what is expected in a smart city initiative. So essentially you have walkable localities, a variety of transportation options, preserving and developing open spaces. So these are 3 aspects where transport planners can contribute quite a lot as well as planning is concerned. Okay. I would also stop, perhaps it's going to be the time, uncertainties in predicting the future. Though we talk about transportation planning, which is essentially future oriented, there are certain uncertainties. Uncertainties with respect to the economy, with respect to fuel usage, availability of fuel, and of course population growth. We have analytical limitations also sometimes to some extent, because we have inventory issues, data issues, forecasting issues. Performance measures themselves could change. We also have influence of politics in our transportation planning process, because many projects could go haywire with the influence or negative influence of politics. So that's also one aspect. It's a reality. We need to face a particular reality. Okay. These are some of the references from where I have taken most of these material. These are some of the picture courtesies which I have taken. And I would like to close with a quote by Stephen Hawking. He said, "Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious, and however difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you just don't give up." Okay, so I feel it's a very apt message for these days. I thank all of you for your time and your patient listening. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for the awesome section. I hope all of you have got an idea regarding the topic, transportation planning. I think now it is the time for doubt clearing section. For those who want to ask the questions, you can either unmute your mic and directly ask, or type the question in your chat box.
Okay, I think I'll take the questions in the chat box right now. The first question is by Mr. Sunny. He says, based on the present COVID, the new trend is to work from home and to work near home. All businesses, commercial establishments are getting regional hub. Does it not reduce urban population density? Can we expect a lesser travel plan? Of course, a lesser travel plan can be expected. But again, it depends upon a number of things. Depending upon the communication technologies that are available, depending upon how well we bridge the digital divide, it is possible that people might travel less. So you must have come across newspaper settings, headings which say that transportation, software companies are promoting work from home. It could be expected. I told you that this is a very random change that we are seeing, and we need to suitably adjust to it. Perhaps ICT, information communication technologies, with smart cities can, of course, try to lessen the travel demand. That could be with respect to, of course, the demand on the network as such, especially during peak hours. But if you take other trip purposes, say, for example, schools, I'm not very sure if schools will not reopen. Schools would tend to reopen, though the parents might be forced to work at home during some days of the week. You would have, again, demand for recreation. You can demand due to social trips, and so on and so forth. Of course, we need to see how the system, moves ahead. Okay. That's one aspect. We have to see. There could be, as you suggested, there could be a lesser travel plan for most people in the coming days, maybe at maximum a year. But after that, it could increase. See, for example, when the present Unlock 1 started, Calicut faced heavy congestion on the roads. Everybody started coming up on the roads with their own vehicles, and they did not use the public transportation systems, maybe because they did not have the confidence in using a public transportation system. Okay, so it could be both ways. Yeah. Another one.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is one that I'm seeing in my chat box. Okay, is there any smart method for collecting data? Data collection has always been a major issue in modeling. Yeah, of course. When I say smart method, the use of GPS methods is something which you can always think of, especially if you want to have traffic counts. You can use cameras. You have very robust image processing techniques by which it's possible for us to use the vehicle on the video cameras for data collection. GPS, GPRS, RFID sensors, these are some of the methods which can be used, which are essentially non-intrusive methods, which can be used for better data collection. How can we solve, that's by Mr. Wahidullah Safi. The earlier question was by Mr. Vicky. By Wahidullah Safi, how can we solve the problem of illegal developed cities now with international norms? This is a very, very tricky question. Why do we still have slums like Dharavi in Bombay? Essentially because people would always want to be near the place where they live, the place of work near to the place where they live, so that they don't have to spend more on transportation systems. So we have what is called as transit-oriented developments, of course, which cannot be taken up perhaps in an already developed setting, but in a developing setting, wherein which you develop on the sites of major transit corridors. That is something which we can do. Another way which you can try to decongest existing cities is, which has been tried but not very successful, is using satellite townships, and by promoting good public transportation systems which link these satellite townships to the major urban centers. There's also something which you can use. Perhaps you can give some subsidies for people to move out of their existing locations to the suburbs, so that and assure them good transportation connectivity, so that you can ensure that people can travel with lesser time, with lesser cost. Okay, I think that is something that can be done. Ms. Shaina Begum asked me, how can we connect GPS or ITS when analyzing travel demand? Yeah, of course, GPS, see, most people who travel on an urban network will have their GPRS on, or they would be, accessing the internet. So it is possible for us to get this information from the mobile network providers. I would suggest you to refer to the papers of Dr. Lalita Devi Vanajakshi of IIT Madras, who has done some work on this particular area. You can refer to her papers. You can go to the website and do that. Okay, I think that should be possible. Neelkan Thakur asked me that what is your view on the odd even scheme adopted by the Delhi government? Does it help to some extent in traffic control? In fact, this is a transportation system management measure, this odd even scheme. Of course, as per se, it helps. But again, the other aspect is you require very strict enforcement. You require alternate systems in place for people who cannot use that particular mode. Say, for example, I have a car which ends with an even number. So which means I cannot take it out on certain days. Now, how do I move? So I might require a good public transportation systems to complement with this, so that people have an alternative for them to travel. So I think assuming that you have systems in place, public transportation systems in place, or maybe systems like which helps in ride sharing, or joint movement in a particular vehicle, odd even scheme could help to some extent. Of course, it has been shown to reduce pollution levels also in Delhi to some extent. But then the other aspect is inconvenience to the people, and of course, enforcement that is required to implement such schemes. Okay. Atira C says, can you throw some light on transportation planning softwares? Well, Atira, transportation planning softwares, we have EMME, that is one transportation planning software. We have Cube, that is another transportation planning software, where all the four planning, urban transportation, travel demand forecasting steps are incorporated. It takes with itself the GIS aspects also, and also that it's possible for us to take up public transportation planning in Cube as well. So I think these are the major softwares that are still being used, EMME and Cube. In fact, they have very good training sessions that are regularly taken up, and it's possible for you to get more idea on that. Cube has a downloadable version, but it is not full-fledged. I think that is fine. Okay. Amal Raj says, how smart transportation system can be absorbed post-COVID in Indian transportation system, making use of the current scenario? What will be the challenges? Okay. Okay. Now, the smart transportation system is wherein which, say for example, you talk about on-demand ride services, like say for example Uber or Ola, which are essentially taxi services that you normally try to access using information communication technologies. So assuming that people can believe these, they can in fact substitute for the travel and public transportation systems. You can have public transportation systems, when I say post-COVID, properly disinfected or cleaned, so that people would be more confident of moving in it. Smart transportation systems would help people not waiting at the bus stops. Say, for example, you have apps which tells you that a particular bus is going to come. You need not wait. You should have an idea regarding how many people are waiting at the bus stop. And if you feel that the numbers are more and there is no scope for social distancing, then perhaps you can start from your home at a slightly delayed time. And once you have a GPS system in the bus, and which is being tracked, it's possible for you to use the bus transportation systems. It's possible for you to know how many number of people are there at the bus and whether there is seating available. If not, I can wait for the next bus that is going to come in next 10 minutes. So obviously a smart transportation system has lots of applications in the post-COVID scenario. Lots of challenges, of course, because you require apps, you require minute-to-minute, transmission of information from the transportation systems to the servers and to the people. Okay, you require good bridge. You need to bridge the digital divide. I think that is something that should be done. I'm sure lots of work have already been started in this particular respect. I think it should be done. So Nishan Kulkshetra says that due to COVID-19, there's behavioral changes in the use of public transportation, very right, which might be permanent for some. So the previous studies will be helpful. We need to scrap it and start afresh. Regarding public transportation systems, we need to perhaps wait and see how people's perception and behavior towards public transportation systems change. Maybe this particular, anthema, this particular fear about traveling in a public transportation system might hold on till a point when maybe for a year or so, and afterwards people would be forced to go by a public transportation system. So you can postpone your travel, but you can't postpone it indefinitely. Say, for example, I travel when work and stay at Calicut. My mother is at Trivandrum. I have not seen her for the past 6 months. But of course, I'll wait for 1 more year and maybe for 6 more months before traveling to her. But after a point of time, I would tend to use a public transportation system to go. That's the only one that is available to me. So this negative feeling towards the public transportation system could be a temporary, attitude. I feel it could change with time, and would change with time. That's what I feel. I hope more people would tend to use public transportation system in the future, especially with the use of communication technologies. So another is Nitish, who says that there is restriction in public transportation system and the rising sales of public transport. How can we forecast demand modeling in this particular case? Well, there could be several scenarios. One particular scenario could be that we see what is the sale of automobiles or the rise in vehicle ownership in a particular area, say, over the past years. And you try to extrapolate it. And of course, I told you there could be uncertainties in the particular prediction, but you might need to go in for most of the traditional predicting methods might not give you a very good statistics, as you rightly said, because this is a very peculiar scenario that has come up. So how can we forecast? Perhaps you can perhaps think of a disproportionate percentage increase in car ownership, maybe by looking at many of the developed countries, and then try to put that in our scenario. I know it is possible, I told you, that our forecast might go totally haywire. But this is planning, and planning always makes mistakes. That's what I feel. Future is always unpredictable. So you can perhaps try to use a more conservative approach in this particular aspect. Okay. Another question from Mr. Satish Kumar is PIV theory. PIV theory essentially with respect to human beings. Now, with most autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles, we need to have a strong re-look at the PIV theory, because, of course, with the assumption that more vehicles would be, autonomous vehicles in the coming years, in the years to come, there has been, aspects, there has been views against the autonomous vehicles also. So, assuming that vehicles our drivers tend to drive, we have this PIV still valid. But if you feel that more autonomous vehicles are going to come into picture, PIV might not be a very good theory for you to trace your driver behavior on. But I feel that PIV still stands sometimes to a great extent for us, because as drivers, we always tend to rely on this particular theory. Amrita Lakshmi asks, which is the main sampling method used in data collection? Of course, simple random sampling is what we normally use. Again, depends upon the type of project that you do. For example, if you're going to do something on public transportation systems, you might need to do on a stratified random sampling. If you're really going to do something on car ownership, again, you need to go for stratified random sampling. Again, it depends upon what is the project that you're working on. It's up to you to choose one. But if you're going for a household survey, simple random sampling is the best approach. Okay. There are some issues on feedback links, I suppose. Manish Babu says, how does activity-based planning work? Can we consider the emotional satisfaction one obtained from involving a particular activity? Activity-based planning is, in fact, I did not purposely do it. I did not take it up here. Activity-based planning tries to incorporate interactions with the household in various travel decisions. Trip-based planning is found to be slightly old these days. We try to focus more on activity-based planning with the premise that travel demand is a derived demand and people would always travel to fulfill certain activities. The emotional satisfaction, yes, we can consider emotional satisfaction by involving in a particular activity. Usually we try to use Likert type scales to identify what is the level of satisfaction that a particular person derives in participating in a particular activity. This can be used for modeling also. It can be done, Manisha. It can be done very easily. Yes. Okay. From Lita Sarasani, yeah. In the post-COVID scenario, most of the people tend to use their own vehicles probably for more than a year. So how can we control the congestion? Well, how can you control the congestion on the roads? Perhaps you need to go in for traffic management measures. It could be, you can go in for fees to enter into congested streets. It's possible for you to have, just as you have these toll plazas which have now been automated, you can have fees charged from people for entering into congested areas during peak hours using their own modes. Okay, you can go in for very high parking fees. You can adopt a car, again, an odd even scheme as Delhi used. It is possible for you to have staggered work hours, and all this comes in transportation system management measures. I would suggest you, Ms. Lita, to refer to the website of. I'm not able to recollect. VTPI, Victoria Transport Policy Institute. VTPI, Victoria Transport Policy Institute. They would be able to give you much better solutions with respect to transportation system management. This essentially comes as an aspect in transportation system management. Okay. I think Satish Kumar have already answered. Yeah, I think that's already answered. Okay. What will be the trend in? What will Ashit says? What will be the trend in public transportation for future forecasting? What will be the trend in public transportation? I do not know whether you're talking about demand for public transportation. Whenever we talk about planning and whenever we talk about public transportation, one aspect that is normally considered is the financial benefit of that is from a public transportation system. Please remember that finance is not only an aspect in public patronage. There is a social aspect to public transportation systems, and the state, when I say the state, the government is expected to fund, to subsidize public transportation because there is a social aspect associated with it. So it could be possible that the demand for public transportation could be less, but doesn't essentially mean that you just stop the service in a particular route. That is not how an egalitarian society, a society which gives importance to people actually should work. In spite of having losses in a particular sector, in a particular route, public transportation systems should be provided. Of course, regarding the level of subsidy to provide, it's a big question. It is always possible that you can charge, if possible, charge more from people who can afford. That means you have more vehicle tax from the high-end users, while you use that to subsidize the public transportation system. So that is how we need to go forward. Okay. Mohammed Khan asked me, in order to improve the travel congestion or to alleviate travel congestion analysis, which we do using any statistical software, doesn't seem to be effective. So what could be the alternative for improving traffic-related issues? What is the present development in travel demand analysis? Most of the statistical tools, that we have their inherent disadvantages, mostly because of sample size issues. Otherwise, we have reasonably good predictions. Regarding the transportation travel demand analysis, I would strongly again suggest you to use softwares like this EMME or Cube. Again, I would also want to caution you that any model that we use is heavily dependent upon the data. So the development of the particular model, the formulation of the particular model, and the outputs of the particular model is dependent upon the quality of the data that we use. So a good data collection is always a prerequisite for developing any model, which could be the reason why your predictions are not coming out good. So for example, if you take a linear regression equation and use the equation having an R-squared value of 0.4, I'm sure your predictions would be haywire and much different from what you expect. The reason being that statistically it has less power. So again, you need to go into why you get such statistically poor models. What is the reason behind it? Is it possible for you to use some other techniques like machine learning algorithms, which will help you to give more predictable estimates? So that is something that you need to do. Okay, I think okay. Ashit again asked me that as the number of private vehicles increases, which might lead to congestion, can we expect planning of more infrastructure projects in coming years? Ashit, personally speaking, I'm not very much for increasing the supply to cater to the demand. I'm more of a management perspective person who would want to have some control on the demand so that the supply is able to match up to the demand. So what is important is the controlling the demand and not the supply. Supply is you build more roads, you go on increasing the width of the road. But how long can you do that? I told you this is a very cyclic process. You raise more, you increase the number of lanes in a particular road, more number of vehicles are going to run, and as number of more vehicles demand increases, again you need to increase supply. This is a vicious cycle. What you need to do is a cut in that vicious cycle by improving a system management measure. So it could be by curtailing the demand to match the supply rather than increasing the supply to cater to the demand. This is my personal opinion, Ashit. Okay. Okay, I think those are the questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, BTP, yeah, I think Jay Kumar, yeah, Jay Parmar has to. Victoria Transport. Yeah, I think that ends with this. Yeah.
So thank you, sir, and all the participants. All the participants for your very active participation. Now I would like to invite Mahima Mary Thomas, MTech scholar from Jyothi Engineering College, for the vote of thanks.
Respected dignitaries and all my dear friends, good afternoon, everyone. I deem it a privilege to have been asked to extend a vote of thanks on this wonderful occasion. Let me first of all start by giving glory to the Almighty God for making this session a resounding success. First and foremost, I thank our resource person, Dr. Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, NIT Calicut, for presenting such an informative session for us. We are grateful to the Jyothi management for their support and guidance. I also extend my sincere gratitude towards the head of the department, Dr. Ratish S., and the faculties for their contribution in making this event a success. Last but not the least, I thank all the participants and my friends for your cooperation. Once again, thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jyothi Engineering College, my MTech student, Prasoon Mandal, who helped me with the PPT. Thank you very much, all. I'm very happy to see some of my old students also here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you all.
Yeah, I'll be logging out, sir. I'll be leaving the call. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
The section is wind up.